She noticed him only because he was out of place. The private terminal was quiet that morning, polished and controlled, built for people who did not wait. He came through a side door with a gray cart, keys clipped to his belt, eyes lowered the way service workers learned to keep them. A single father. A janitor. At least, that was what his badge said. She laughed when he stopped near her jet. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just enough to make the moment tilt. He did not react. He checked something on his phone, rested a hand on the railing, and waited. The plane behind him cost more than most buildings in the city. The people around her were watching now, unsure why he hadn't moved. In less than 10 minutes, the engines would start, and when they did, something about how she understood power, ownership, and judgment would break without asking permission. If stories like this matter to you, take a second to subscribe, not for shock, for consequence. He woke before the alarm because he always did. The room was still dark, the kind of dark that meant the city hadn't decided what it was yet. He sat up slowly, listening for any sound from the next room. Nothing. That was good. It meant his son was still asleep, breathing steady, wrapped in the blanket that never stayed where it should. He stood, pulled on the same jeans from the chair, and folded the shirt he'd worn the day before. He placed it in the laundry basket without checking whether it really belonged there. Small decisions were easier when they followed a pattern. In the kitchen, he rinsed a cup before filling it with water. The coffee stayed in the cabinet. He'd learned what it did to his hands later in the day. He packed a lunch without thinking about it. Bread. Something folded inside. An apple. He pressed the zipper closed and set the bag by the door. The badge hung on a hook near the light switch. He took it down and clipped it to his belt. The plastic was scratched, the photo faded enough that it could have been anyone. He didn't mind that. It did what it needed to do. He checked the clock. Still time. He walked into his son's room and nudged the door open with his shoulder. The floor creaked in the same place it always did. He paused, waiting to see if that would wake him. It didn't. He crossed the room and pulled the blanket up, careful not to tuck it in too tightly. His son shifted, turned his face toward the wall, and sighed. That sound stayed with him longer than it should have. At the door, he stopped and looked back once. Then he turned off the light. Outside, the air had weight to it. Not cold, just heavy enough to remind him he was awake. He locked the door and checked it, then checked it again. The bus stop was 3 blocks down. He walked there with his hands in his pockets, shoulders forward, eyes on the ground where the sidewalk dipped near the storm drain. The bus came late. He stood without checking the time. When it arrived, he climbed aboard and sat in the same seat he always did. The ride passed without conversation. He got off 2 stops early, the way he preferred, and walked the rest. The facility came into view slowly. First the fence, then the lights. Then the shape of the building itself, low and wide, with nothing about it that suggested what moved through it every day. He scanned his badge and waited for the click. When it came, he pushed through. Inside, the floors were already clean. He noted that without comment. He checked the schedule posted near the supply room. His name sat where it always did. Night shift, terminal interior, auxiliary corridors. He took the cart from the corner and loaded it with what he needed. The wheels squeaked. He adjusted them until they didn't. He worked in a straight line. Down one corridor, then back up the other. Trash removed. Surfaces wiped. Corners checked. He moved the same way he always did, not because he had to, but because it left less behind. Less chance of mistake. Less reason for anyone to remember him later. A supervisor passed once, nodded without slowing down. He nodded back. That was enough. By the time the first of the early departures arrived, he was already finished with the interior. He stood near the break room door and drank from the water fountain. The sound echoed longer than he expected. He stepped back and waited for it to stop. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't look at it right away. When he did, it was a message from the school, a reminder about a form he hadn't signed yet. He typed a short reply and put the phone away. The supervisor returned, holding a clipboard this time. He called his name without raising his voice. "There's a change," he said. "Need you outside tomorrow morning. Runway side." Short window. He nodded. Changes happened. Usually small. Usually manageable. You've got clearance? The supervisor asked. Yes, he said. The supervisor checked a clipboard. Be there early. He watched him leave, then turned back to the corridor. The rest of the shift passed without incident. At the end, he returned the cart, wiped it down, and hung his badge back on the hook near the exit. Outside again, the sky had started to shift. He walked to the bus stop, hands empty now, lunch bag lighter. When he got home, his son was awake, sitting at the table with a bowl in front of him. You're late, his son said. Not late, he said, setting the bag down. Just different. His son considered that, then nodded. He went back to his cereal. He washed his hands at the sink and watched the water run clear. Tomorrow would start the same way. He trusted that. He turned off the faucet. The next morning began earlier than usual. He noticed it when he reached for the alarm and realized it hadn't gone off yet. The room was quiet, but the quiet felt thinner, less settled. He sat up anyway. There was no reason to stay. In the kitchen, he packed the same lunch with the same care. His son wandered in while he was zipping the bag. You working late again? His son asked. No, he said. Just somewhere else. His son poured cereal without looking at him. Okay. That was all it took. He slipped on his jacket, checked his pockets, and left before the sun had fully decided to show itself. The terminal looked different in the early light. Less forgiving. The glass reflected more than it revealed. He scanned his badge at a side gate he hadn't used before, and waited longer than usual for the click. When it came, he stepped through and followed the markings on the ground toward the runway access point. Out here, everything felt spaced apart. The distance between objects was intentional. The planes sat farther from one another than they needed to, like people who could afford to be alone. He slowed his pace, not out of caution, but habit. He didn't want to appear uncertain. He was issued a vest and a radio he wouldn't need to speak into. The supervisor pointed once, toward a stretch of pavement near the private terminal. Just keep it clear, he said, and don't cross unless you're told. I know, he said. The supervisor hesitated, then nodded and moved on. From this angle, the terminal looked like a different building. The entrances were smaller, the glass darker. People entered through doors that didn't face the street. Cars pulled up and left without waiting. Luggage moved from trunk to cart without being touched twice. He positioned his cart near the edge of the marked area and waited. When debris appeared, he removed it. When it didn't, he stood still. The engines from distant planes came and went, a low sound that pressed against his chest without asking permission. She arrived mid-morning. He noticed the change before he saw her, the way people straightened, the way voices adjusted their volume. A black car rolled up and stopped where it wasn't supposed to. No one said anything. The door opened and she stepped out without hurry. She was dressed simply, but nothing about her suggested uncertainty. The people around her moved as if they had rehearsed it. Someone handed her a phone. Someone else spoke quietly, leaning in just enough to be heard. She nodded once and kept walking. He kept his eyes on the ground. Her jet was already there, larger than most, polished to the point that it reflected the sky instead of sitting beneath it. He had cleaned planes like it before, but never this one, and never from this side. She stopped at the base of the stairs and listened to someone explain something she already knew. Her face tightened, just slightly. She glanced at her watch. Then she turned and walked back toward the terminal without comment. He adjusted his cart and continued along the edge of the pavement. He could feel the weight of the plane even from a distance. It changed how the space behaved. Sound traveled differently around it. At one point she passed close enough that he caught the scent of something clean and unfamiliar. She didn't look at him. There was no reason to. He was part of the background, like the markings on the ground or the lights embedded in the pavement. He bent to pick up a piece of plastic near the wheel well and dropped it into the bag. His radio crackled once, then went quiet again. The delay stretched. People gathered near the terminal windows. Conversations stopped and started without resolution. He remained where he was, shifting his weight only when his foot began to ache. Eventually she returned, standing just outside the glass. She spoke to someone with her back turned to him. Her voice didn't carry. It didn't need to. He checked the time once, then put his phone away. The jet remained still, the stairs untouched. The space around it held its breath. He moved closer, just to ensure the path was clear, not crossing any lines, not breaking any rules. From where he stood, he could see his reflection faintly in the side of the plane. It looked distorted, stretched thin by the curve of the metal. He didn't linger on it. Behind him, the terminal doors opened again. Footsteps followed. Laughter, brief and contained, cut through the air. He stayed where he was. He had been asked to be here. That was enough. He was given a different set of gloves for this section of the day. Thinner, darker. A supervisor handed them over without explanation, the way rules often arrived here already formed, not open to discussion. Only exterior contact, the supervisor said, nothing else. He nodded and pulled the gloves on, flexing his fingers once to make sure they fit. They did. Everything here was measured that way. The jet stood alone now. The delay had cleared most of the surrounding traffic, leaving it exposed in a way that made the size more obvious. From up close, the polish wasn't impressive. It was practical. Every surface existed to reduce drag, reduce resistance, reduce anything unnecessary. He moved along the marked perimeter, eyes scanning the ground. A loose strap from a service cart had drifted closer to the landing gear. He knelt, gathered it, and secured it back where it belonged. His movements were slow, deliberate. Nothing he did suggested urgency. The radio crackled again. This time, his name came through. "Status?" a voice asked. "Clear," he said. That was the only word required. As he stood, he noticed the access panel near the forward fuselage was slightly ajar. Not open. Just enough to catch the light wrong. He stopped where he was. He wasn't assigned to that. He knew the line as clearly as the paint on the ground. He looked toward the terminal. No one was watching him directly, but that didn't mean anything. He waited. The technician approached from the opposite side, tools clipped to his belt, eyes already on the panel. "Good catch," the technician said, more to himself than to him. He nodded once and stepped back. The technician worked quickly, resealing the panel with practiced motions. When he was done, he wiped his hands on a cloth and glanced at him. "You ever fly?" the technician asked. "No," he said. The technician shrugged. "Not missing much?" He walked off without waiting for a response. He continued along the perimeter. The stairs were still positioned away from the jet, locked in place until the signal came. He had cleaned stairs like those hundreds of times, but never these. These were kept separate, guarded the way entrances always were. From the terminal windows, he could see movement again. The woman had returned, this time with fewer people around her. She stood with her arms crossed, weight shifted to one hip, listening to someone explain something that still wasn't happening. Her face didn't show frustration. It showed expectation. He kept his eyes forward. A different supervisor approached, one he didn't recognize well. Younger, less settled. "Just stay put," the supervisor said. "Don't improvise." "I won't," he said. The supervisor hesitated, then added, "These clients don't like surprises." He said nothing. The supervisor walked away, already distracted by his radio. He stood there longer than he expected to. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the jet's surface, until it became difficult to look at directly. He shifted his position slightly, using the shadow cast by the wing. From this angle, the plane blocked out part of the terminal. It was like standing behind a wall that had been moved without notice. He could hear voices but not see faces. It reminded him of being backstage at a place he'd never be allowed to enter. The woman stepped outside again. This time, she walked closer to the edge of the tarmac, stopping just short of the marked line. She looked out at the jet, then down at the ground, as if measuring the distance herself. Her eyes passed over him without stopping. Someone beside her laughed quietly at something he couldn't hear. She smiled in response, brief and controlled. He bent to check the pavement near the front wheel. A small crack had collected grit. He brushed it clean with his gloved hand. The sound of footsteps approached from behind him. He straightened slowly. "Why is he there?" a voice asked. "He didn't turn." "It's fine," another voice said. "He's staff." The word settled over him without weight. He remained where he was, aware now of the attention he hadn't had before. Not directed. Just present. The kind that came when people noticed something out of alignment. The stairs were rolled closer at last. He stepped back to give space, positioning himself where he could see but not be seen. The door of the jet opened, revealing an interior that looked nothing like the rest of the building. Softer, quieter. Designed to hold people, not process them. The woman ascended the stairs part way, paused, then turned back toward the terminal. "Give me 5, she said. The door closed again. He exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath without meaning to. His radio buzzed once more. "Stay where you are," the voice said. "I am," he replied. He checked the time. The window was closing. He could feel it in the way the air shifted, in the way people moved faster without acknowledging it. He adjusted his gloves and took one step closer to the jet, not crossing any lines, not breaking any rules. Just close enough to do what he was there to do. That was when she saw him. She looked at him longer than she needed to. It wasn't confusion that crossed her face. It was calculation, quick and incomplete. Her eyes moved from his vest to the cart, then to the jet behind him. The alignment didn't make sense to her, and she didn't wait for it to. "Is he supposed to be there?" she asked. "Not to him." No one answered right away. The question hovered, looking for someone else to carry it. He stayed still. One hand rested on the handle of the cart. The other hung at his side. He had learned that stillness often read as compliance. She took a step closer to the marked line and tilted her head slightly, as if viewing a detail from a different angle. "Oh," she said and laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was brief, contained, the kind of sound that slipped out when something amused her without deserving much attention. A few people around her smiled automatically. One of them glanced at him, then back at her, unsure whether to intervene. He felt the moment change shape. He didn't look at her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The movement unhurried. The screen lit up. He checked the time, then tapped once. The action was small, but it interrupted something. The laughter stopped. "What's he doing?" someone asked. She didn't answer. Her smile lingered, but it no longer had a place to land. He stepped forward, past the edge of the marked area, just enough to reach the stairs. No one stopped him. The radio at his shoulder remained silent. He placed a hand on the railing and tested it, the way he had been trained to do with anything that moved. She watched him now. "Excuse me," she said, her voice even. "That's restricted." He paused, not because of her words, but because the routine required it. He checked the latch at the base of the stairs, then adjusted it. Only then did he look up. "Yes," he said. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't refusal. It was acknowledgement. He climbed. The stairs were solid beneath his feet. He noticed that immediately. They didn't flex the way others did. Each step held without response. He counted them out of habit, stopping at the door. Behind him, voices rose, then fell. He heard his name over the radio for the first time since morning, followed by static. "Hold position," someone said, too late. He opened the door and stepped inside. The cockpit was quiet, waiting. He slid into the left seat and set his bag down beside him. The motions were familiar, even here. Especially here. He checked the switches in order, fingers moving with the certainty that came from repetition, not confidence. Outside, the woman had moved closer to the stairs. Her expression had shifted again, the amusement replaced by something sharper. "Who authorized this?" she asked. No one answered her. Inside, he placed the headset over his ears and adjusted it. The world narrowed to a series of sounds that made sense. He keyed the mic. "Ground," he said. A pause. Then, "Go ahead." "Beginning startup," he said. Another pause. This one longer. "Confirm," the voice said. He glanced once at the panel, then back through the windshield. The tarmac stretched out in front of him, empty and waiting. "Confirmed," he said. The first engine came alive with a low vibration, barely audible at first. He felt it through the seat before he heard it. The plane responded the way it always did, gradually, without drama. Outside, people stepped back. She froze. "What is happening?" she said, her voice louder now, no longer contained. Someone near her checked their phone. Another spoke into a radio, words overlapping without clarity. The laughter from before had vanished, replaced by movement without direction. The second engine followed, the sound deeper, more present. The air around the jet shifted, dust lifting from the pavement in a slow arc. She took another step forward, then stopped herself, her eyes locked on the cockpit window. For the first time, she seemed to see him clearly, not as a role, not as a mistake, but as a person who was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Stop him," she said. No one moved. Inside, he completed the sequence, each step closing off another possibility. He didn't rush. There was no benefit to rushing now. The radio crackled again. This time, multiple voices spoke at once, then cut off. "Shut it down," someone said. He waited for the proper signal. It didn't come. He looked down at the controls, then up again. The jet was no longer still. It had crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed without consequence. Outside, security approached at a distance, unsure where to place themselves. The supervisors stood back, eyes on their screens, hands off. She lowered her arm slowly. Her face had gone still. He removed the headset and placed it carefully on the console. The engines continued to idle, steady and loud enough now to make conversation difficult. He sat there, hands resting in his lap, waiting. The moment had passed. What followed would belong to everyone else. The engines held their rhythm, not loud enough to be dramatic, just present enough to change how everything worked. No one rushed the plane. That was the first thing he noticed. The urgency stayed contained, pressed down by procedure and fear of making it worse. Security stopped short of the stairs. Supervisors clustered near the terminal doors, radios lifted but unused, waiting for someone higher to decide what the situation meant. Inside the cockpit, he remained seated. The checklist was complete. There was nothing left to do unless told otherwise. He rested his hands on his knees and looked straight ahead. The glass muted the outside world, turning motion into shapes without sound. On the tarmac, she stood still. Her phone was in her hand now, but she wasn't looking at it. Someone leaned in to speak to her. She didn't respond. Another person gestured toward the plane, then toward the terminal. She shook her head once, barely. The delay was no longer about weather or scheduling. It had become something else, something visible. A senior manager arrived, identifiable by the way people moved aside without being asked. He spoke briefly to security, then into his radio. His gaze lifted toward the cockpit. He squinted, as if that might clarify things. The radio in the cockpit crackled. "Identify yourself," a voice said. He reached up, replaced the headset, and keyed the mic. "This is maintenance pilot," he said. He used the title as it existed on paper, not the one people preferred to remember. There was a pause. Then, "You're not listed on today's flight crew." "I'm not on the flight crew," he said. "I'm assigned to this aircraft." Another pause. Longer. Outside, she took a step back. Not because she was told to, but because the sound had shifted again. The engines were steady, but the air around them carried weight now, pressing against conversation, against authority. "What assignment?" the voice asked. He recited it. Date. Time. Authorization code. The words came out evenly. He had memorized them years ago, not for moments like this, but because forgetting them once had cost him a job he couldn't afford to lose. The response didn't come immediately. On the tarmac, one of the supervisors turned toward her and spoke. She listened this time. Her jaw tightened. She glanced up at the cockpit window again, then away, as if refusing to give the moment more shape than it already had. People nearby began to understand, not all at once. It moved in pieces, a shift in posture, a change in tone, someone stepping back from her instead of closer. A voice came through the headset. "Shut down sequence approved. Do not taxi." "Copy," he said. He reached forward and began the shutdown, reversing the steps he'd completed earlier. Each movement removed a layer of pressure from the space. The engines wound down gradually, the sound falling away rather than stopping. Dust settled back onto the pavement. When it was quiet again, the absence felt heavier than the noise had. He removed the headset and stood. He didn't rush to exit. He gathered his bag, checked the cockpit once more, and opened the door. The stairs waited, unchanged. As he descended, the air hit him differently. cooler, thinner. The people below had reorganized themselves without deciding to. A path had opened, not for him, but around him. She stood to the side now, not at the front. He stepped onto the pavement and turned to secure the door. His hands moved automatically. When he turned back, she was closer than before. "You need to explain," she said. Her voice was controlled, but it carried strain now. Not anger, something closer to loss. "I followed the assignment," he said. "That plane is mine," she said. He looked at her then. Not directly. Just enough to register her face, the way it had changed since the laugh. "It's registered to the company," he said. "I work for them." That was all. A manager approached, clipboard held tight against his chest. He addressed her first, lowering his voice. She listened, eyes fixed on a point over his shoulder. When he finished, she nodded once. "What does this mean?" she asked. "It means we're delayed," the manager said, "and we need to talk." She looked back at him. For a moment, something like recognition passed between them, not familiarity, just acknowledgement that something had shifted. Her phone buzzed. She answered it without looking away from him. "Yes," she said. "Then, no. Then, I understand." She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket. The movement was slower than before. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly. He considered that. The word didn't land the way she expected it to. "I didn't see you," he said. "You laughed." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was occupied by people listening without meaning to. The manager cleared his throat. "We'll need statements," he said. He nodded. She turned away. Security approached then, not to restrain him, but to escort. The distinction mattered. He followed without resistance, walking past the terminal doors he usually cleaned, through corridors he wasn't scheduled to enter. In a small office, he sat and waited. The walls were bare. A clock ticked too loudly. His phone buzzed. He checked it. A message from his son. "Are you picking me up today?" He typed back slowly. "Might be late." The reply came quickly. "Okay." He set the phone down and stared at the table. The surface was scratched, worn by other people waiting for decisions they couldn't influence. After a while, the door opened. The senior manager entered, followed by the supervisor from the night shift. "We're reviewing your authorization," the manager said. "Until then, you're relieved of duties." "For today?" he asked. "For now," the manager said. The supervisor shifted his weight. He didn't look at him. "You'll be contacted," the manager added. "Turn in your badge." He unclipped it and placed it on the table. The plastic made a soft sound when it landed. No one spoke after that. He was escorted out through a different exit, one that led away from the terminal entirely. Outside, the fence ran long and uninterrupted, separating the runway from the rest of the world. He stood there for a moment, unsure which direction to go. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. He answered. "Dad?" his son said. "Yes. Did you do something wrong?" He looked through the fence at the planes lined up beyond it. "No," he said. There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," his son said. That was all. The call ended. He put the phone away and started walking. The jet behind the fence sat quiet now. The woman was no longer visible. The space around it had returned to order, but not to how it had been before. He didn't look back again. The silence followed him anyway. He took the bus home in the middle of the day, something he hadn't done in years. The seats were fuller, the air warmer, the people louder. He stood near the back, holding the rail with one hand, letting the motion steady him. No one looked at him twice. That felt familiar. When he unlocked the apartment door, his son wasn't there yet. The quiet inside was different from the quiet of the early morning. It had edges. He set his bag down and stood in the kitchen without turning on the light. The clock on the microwave blinked, still unset from the last outage. He poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He sat at the table and emptied his pockets. Keys, phone, gloves he hadn't returned yet. He turned them over once, then placed them beside the sink. The table felt larger without the lunch bag on it. Later, when his son came home, he was talking before he reached the door. "You're early," his son said, stepping inside. "Yes," he said. "Did you get fired?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was practical. "I don't know yet," he said. His son considered that, then shrugged. He took off his shoes and set them where they belonged. "Okay," he said. "Can we still eat?" "Yes," he said. "Can we still eat?" "Yes," he said. They cooked together without much conversation. He cut vegetables while his son stirred the pot. Steam filled the kitchen, fogging the window that looked out over the parking lot. A car alarm went off briefly, then stopped. As they ate, his son watched him more than the food. "The plane," his son said finally. "Was it big?" "Yes," he said. "Did you fly it?" He paused, then nodded once. "Just a little." His son smiled at that. "Not wide. Just enough." After dinner, he helped with homework, then sat on the couch while his son watched something loud and fast-moving. He didn't follow it. His attention stayed on the hum of the refrigerator, the way the floor creaked when someone walked past the apartment above them. That night, after his son fell asleep, he stood at the window. Planes crossed the sky at regular intervals, their lights blinking in patterns he recognized. He knew which ones were climbing and which were descending. He knew how long it would take them to disappear. The phone rang near midnight. "Yes," he said. The voice on the other end was measured. Careful. "We've completed the review," the manager said. "Your authorization was valid." He waited. "However," the manager continued, "your decision created complications. Client relationships were affected." "I understand," he said. There was a pause. "You won't be returning to your previous role." "I expected that." "We can offer a transfer," the manager said. "Facilities, off-site, same pay." He looked toward his son's room. The door was closed, light off. "When?" he asked. "Immediately." "Yes," he said. The call ended without ceremony. The next morning, he woke at the usual time. The routine held, even if the destination didn't. He packed lunch. He checked the clock. He stood in his son's doorway for a moment longer than before. "You okay?" his son asked, eyes half open. "Yes," he said. "I'll be back later." The new site was smaller. No planes, no fences, just a low building with windows that didn't reflect much. He was given a locker and a new set of keys. No one mentioned the incident. The supervisor showed him the schedule and moved on. He worked through the day without interruption. The floors here scuffed more easily. The walls held fingerprints longer. The work felt heavier, but clearer. When something was dirty, it stayed dirty until he cleaned it. During a break, he stepped outside and sat on the curb. Planes passed overhead, lower here, louder. He watched one disappear behind a line of trees. He understood something then, not all at once, but enough. The access had never been the point. The proximity hadn't been either. What mattered was that he had been trusted once, even briefly, to do something that required precision and restraint. That trust had been real, even if it hadn't lasted. He stood and went back inside. The day ended on time. He clocked out and took the bus home. His son was waiting, backpack at his feet. "How was work?" his son asked. "Different," he said. His son nodded. "Different is okay." He let that sit between them as they walked home. Nothing felt resolved, but something had settled. The letter arrived 3 days later. It came in a plain envelope, addressed correctly but without care. He recognized the return address before he opened it. He stood at the counter and read it once, then again, slower. The transfer was permanent. The pay would remain the same, but the hours would not. Earlier starts, earlier finishes, fewer overtime options. It was framed as a stability measure. He folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The motion felt practiced, like something he had done before, even if he hadn't. That evening, he picked his son up from school instead of meeting him halfway. The timing worked that way now. He stood near the fence while children poured out, loud and uneven, carrying parts of their day without knowing it. His son spotted him and waved. "You're early again," his son said, dropping his bag. "Yes," he said. They walked home together. His son talked about a project he hadn't finished yet, about a friend who had moved seats in class. He listened, nodding when it seemed required. At home, he made a call before dinner. He stood in the hallway so his son wouldn't hear. "I'm calling about the hours," he said. "Yes, I understand. I'm accepting." He ended the call and leaned his head against the wall for a moment. Not long enough to rest. Just long enough to feel the texture of it. At dinner, his son noticed the letter on the counter. "What's that?" he asked. "Work," he said. "Is it bad?" "No," he said. "Is it bad?" "No," he said. "It's just different." His son looked at him, then at the food. "You say that a lot." He considered that. "Yes," he said. After dinner, his son worked on his project at the table. He watched for a while, then reached into the drawer and took out a set of old manuals he hadn't opened in years. He flipped through them slowly, stopping at pages he recognized by feel more than memory. Later, he packed his bag for the next day. He removed the gloves he'd kept and set them aside. He wouldn't need them anymore. The decision was small, but it closed something. Before bed, his son stood in the doorway. "Are you mad?" his son asked. "No," he said. "At the lady?" He paused. "I don't think about her," he said. His son nodded, accepting that without needing it explained. The next week settled into its own rhythm. He adjusted to the new hours. The worksite stayed predictable. No one there knew what he'd done before, and no one asked. He became what he appeared to be. One afternoon, as they walked home, his son stopped near the corner store. "Can we get ice cream?" he asked. "Yes," he said. They ate it on the curb. It melted faster than they expected. His son laughed when it dripped onto his hand. "Dad," his son said, not looking at him, "you didn't do anything wrong, right?" "No," he said. His son nodded. "I know. That was the cost. Not the job. Not the access. The quiet understanding that some things would never be visible, no matter how precisely they were done." He threw the empty wrappers away and stood. "Let's go," he said. They walked home together. The street familiar in a way, the runway never had been. Something had been given up. Something else had been kept. Neither could be measured. The terminal continued without him. Planes arrived and left on schedule. Crews rotated. The glass stayed clean. The jet flew again, piloted by someone whose name was already expected, whose presence raised no questions. The woman boarded on a different morning, surrounded by fewer people this time. She didn't laugh. She didn't look toward the runway longer than necessary. Nothing dramatic followed her delay. No apology arrived. No apology arrived. No explanation was offered. The system absorbed the disruption and sealed itself back into place. Across town, his mornings stayed earlier than they used to be. He learned the rhythm of the new building quickly, the way the lights buzzed before warming up, the way one door never closed all the way unless pushed twice. He fixed what could be fixed. He left the rest alone. He picked his son up every day now. They walked home together, sometimes in silence, sometimes not. The route passed under the flight path. Planes crossed overhead, low enough that the sound filled the space between words. His son would look up until they passed. One afternoon, they stopped at the fence near the small park. You could see the sky clearly there. "Is that one of yours?" his son asked, pointing. He followed the line of his finger. A jet moved steadily across the blue. No markings visible from this distance. "No," he said. His son nodded. He watched it until it disappeared. They sat on a bench. The wood was warm from the sun. He rested his hands on his knees, the same way he had in the cockpit, though the space around him now was ordinary and unguarded. "Dad," his son said. "Yes, you didn't move when she laughed." He turned slightly. "No." "That was good," his son said. He didn't respond right away. The plane was gone now. The sound had faded. "Yes," he said finally. They sat there a moment longer, then stood and walked home. That evening, he washed the dishes while his son dried them, handing each one over carefully. A plate slipped and chipped at the edge. His son froze, waiting. "It's fine," he said, taking it from him. He set it aside. The chip stayed. Later, after his son went to bed, He stood at the window again. Fewer planes passed this late. When one did, he watched it without naming it, without tracking its climb. He didn't miss the fence. He didn't miss the badge. He didn't miss being close enough to touch something that wasn't his. In the morning, he would wake before the alarm. He would pack lunch. He would walk the same 3 blocks to the bus stop. And when he arrived, the building would be waiting for him. Not because it had to, because it was different now.